Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar series, How to Better Serve Justice-Involved Veterans. This webinar series is designed for community service providers. My name is Corinne Holmes, and I am a director here at Smart Policy Works, and I will also be moderating today's discussion. Today, we will be discussing and posing some questions to our expert panel from the Veterans Justice Outreach team. Before I introduce our two guest speakers, I wanted to just do a little review of our webinar series over the last 3 weeks. Next slide. So over the last 3 weeks, our webinar series has been designed to provide resources to community providers to better meet the needs of justice-involved veterans. So we had our experts from the VA to talk about healthcare, education and employment resources, and also housing and homeless prevention services. These all are services that can be used to help reduce recidivism and help veterans reintegrate and stay in the community. Next slide, please. So I want to kind of just talk about some key takeaways. So over the last 3 weeks, big things that we should, key takeaways is, the military has its own unique cultures and veterans have their own unique needs. So it's really important as community service providers to really be aware of VA-specific housing, education, resources, and benefits that veterans may be eligible for. What we've learned over the last several weeks is that justice involvement does not disqualify veterans for benefits. And if these benefits can help them reintegrate better into the community, it's really important to be aware of them and also encourage veterans to apply for these resources. It takes a team. It's not just one, it's all. Sometimes collaborations are needed within the VA and also between the VA and the community to make sure that veterans are aware and get connected to these resources. So these are the big key takeaways that I wanted to review before we go into our panel discussion. Next slide. So I wanted to kind of just highlight 2 additional programs that we didn't discuss over the last several weeks. That is the Veteran Justice Outreach Program, and then also the Veterans Treatment Courts. So we'll go to the next slide. So the Veterans Justice Outreach Program, which we'll be talking about a lot today. So the mission of the Veterans Justice Outreach Program is really to identify those veterans through direct outreach and to connect those veterans to resources within the VA and benefits at this earliest possible point. So Veteran Justice Outreach Specialists, which we will talk to, Janika is one today. They are definitely a part of this program. They are in every state, and they provide the direct outreach. They provide assessments and case management for justice-involved veterans in local courts and jails. They also serve as liaisons to veterans treatment courts, crisis interventions teams, and police departments, for probation and parole officers. So their goal is to really connect and get that veteran connected to and aware of veteran-specific resources that will help them transition to community and stay in community. And the next slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Veterans Treatment Court, just a high-level overview of it. The Veterans Treatment Court, it's really a model that's based on the Drug and Mental Health Court, and its primary focus of the VTC is not really to determine whether or not, a veteran is guilty of offense, but rather to make sure that they receive the treatment to address, some of the underlying issues that may have caused them to have justice involvement and really get them connected to the care to meet their holistic needs. So now at this time, what I want to do is I want to introduce our 2 key panelists, our experts at the VA. So we have Sergio Rajetta. He is actually, and also Janika Walker. They're both clinical social workers, at the VA. And Sergio's primary focus is to provide the clinical assessments for justice-involved veterans, both with veterans that have been identified through the Veterans Justice Outreach Program, and also veterans who are within the participating in the Veterans Treatment Court. So we'll talk a little bit about and pose questions to Sergio about how he connects with these veterans. And we also have Janika, and Janika is a Veterans Justice Outreach Specialist through VA Jesse Brown. And she is also a clinical social worker, and does the IDREACH and works directly with justice-involved veterans. Now, next slide, please. So at this time, I'm going to open it up some questions for specific questions. First, we'll talk a little bit about what the Veterans Justice Outreach Program is. Now, if you do have questions, please feel free to comment, address those questions in the comment box, and we'll capture those and we'll either ask those questions to Sergio or Janika. So what I wanted to do is I'll just open it up a little bit, and I have a question specifically for Janika, since she's a Veterans Justice Outreach Specialist. Janika, could you please, what is the role of a Veterans Justice Outreach Specialist? And how can you really help connect, or how do you help justice-involved veterans?
Absolutely. So first, I just want to say good morning and thank you for having me. My role and the role of a lot of Veterans Justice Outreach Specialists is to assist veterans who would benefit from treatment and other services. We ensure access to healthcare. We tailor it individually to the veteran's need. We improve their social skills, their clinical outcome, provide them with some employment services, some housing resources. So basically, we literally are that be-all case management piece that ensures that the veteran's unfortunate justice-involved outcome doesn't result to incarceration. So we literally meet them where they are. Sometimes they are incarcerated, local jails, or at that forefront of the Veterans Treatment Court for consideration. We link them with our assessment specialists, which Sergio does a phenomenal job assessing our veterans. And we pretty much meet them where they are and see what they need. At that point, we start linking them to those supportive services. And then we follow them for the duration of the Veterans Treatment Court, which is normally 1.5 to 2 years, depending on their process in court. So we basically are like the liaison between the VA and the criminal court system. And we are always in the best interest of that veteran to just provide the services that they need.
Thank you for answering that question. So how does a veteran get connected to you?
A lot of the times, we have a assistant state's attorney that is located in the bond court of our particular branch that we cover, which is 26 in California. A lot of the times the ASA in that court, bond court, will screen potential veterans. That's one way to get connected. Another way is if the veteran identifies himself as a veteran to his public defender or to the judge, then it will be referred to the veteran. Another way is referrals through case managers or clinical social workers. We have a process here at Jesse Brown where if they have identified a veteran that they are working with has indeed gotten into some trouble and involved with the justice system, they will reach out to us and we will assess and refer. And then lastly, the veteran can self-refer themselves. So we have pamphlets throughout Jesse Brown and also with our social workers that they have our identification and contact information. So if they fall upon hard times, they can inquire and reach out to us to see if they are eligible for the program.
Great. Thank you for providing that information. So I know we talked a lot in past webinars about VA eligibility for certain programs, and it kind of varies from program to program. And honorable service seems to be the indicator for qualification for a lot of different programs. Now, I'm curious, are you able to, with veterans that may not have an honorable, have less than honorable discharge?
That's a great question. So we have been able to rarely with veterans who may have an honorable or a dishonorable discharge. And that is through our 90-day suicide prevention model. If their treatment need indicates that they have severe intensive case management needs, suicide behaviors, they may qualify for a 90-day intervention. However, that's only 3 months of the required 2 years. So a lot of the times we partner with our community stakeholders, and TASK is also a major provider that takes on the brunt leg of that and assists those veterans. But I do want to point out one good thing is if they are other than honorable or dishonorable, they are with us for 90 days, but during that 90 days, we link them with our homeless coordinator and get them services. We have an excellent liaison, Kevin Howe, who I believe spoke a couple weeks ago. He works very closely with us, and he works with these veterans, and he's very diligent to try to upgrade their discharge. And so we have actually been able to have a couple veterans upgrade their discharges since, becoming involved with the Veterans Justice Program. And so subsequently, they are entitled to full health care benefits after the upgrade.
Great. Thank you for providing all that information. Veteran Justice Outreach specialists actually do, from my understanding, a lot of outreach into the jails and the various prisons. Is that something that, how does that work? Is it something that happens weekly or quarterly? How does the Veterans Justice Outreach Program conduct its outreach within the jails and prisons?
Well, pre-COVID, we were doing outreach on a weekly basis. We have a HCRV specialist, which is Melissa, who I think spoke a couple weeks ago as well. She's our prison outreach specialist. She also goes out into the community county jail. The interesting piece about our program is that we interchange roles. So we actually are trained to do every single component of outreach. Since COVID, however, we have kind of moved to a virtual model, as mostly everyone has. And so we're shifting. And with that shifting, we are doing phone calls weekly to our outreach community partners, reaching out to the prisons, reaching out to the jails, seeing if they have identified any veterans who may be coming up on release, and developing a treatment plan for them upon their discharge from those prisons or jails.
Great. Thank you for answering that question. As we continue to monitor the feed for questions, I'll just go on and ask some additional questions. So I wanted to transition a little bit to tips for community providers when it comes to providing case management for justice-involved veterans. So my first question now, and I'll pose this to Sergio, and Janika, please feel free to answer as well, is what are some common treatment needs that you're seeing that for the justice-involved veterans that you're interfacing with?
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me. So before I answer that question, I just wanted to mention that my role is not a full VJO, but I cover the federal court. And the federal court is a small version, not very similar to criminal. Generally, they have misdemeanors because they have committed what is considered a misdemeanor crime in a federal building, hospital, any other places. So they are referred to federal court, where I am the role. I do similar things like Janika did. So I am also familiar with VJOs. One point I was helping cover the criminal court. So the federal court, like I said before, is similar. We have the same components, the judge, the state attorneys, public defender, and the public defender mainly is through the University of Illinois, John Marshall Law. They are the ones who do the defending for the veterans. So regarding your questions about the clinical piece, I get the referrals from Janica or the BJOs from court. And what I do is a total assessment of the veterans, mental health, including substance abuse. And it's basically a psychosocial. But I personally, for my experience, like to add a lot of personal history, family history, because I don't want the court to see this individual as a diagnosis. So he has depression, PTSD. I want them to see as an individual. So I provide that because I think it's extremely important for them to know. Most of the time, people think that veterans have been injured emotionally while being in service, but that's not really the case in my experience. Many times prior to joining the military, they have a condition, substance abuse, mental health, and while in the military, because of the way it is very structured, they are able to function. But once they leave, the conditions where they came from are still existing. Many times they don't have the support, they end homeless. So that's what I focus my assessment on doing that. So once they come to my office, I do a full assessment. To my advantage, most of the veterans, because the ones that I see, many of them are from the Vietnam era. They're in their 50s, older. Now we are getting more younger veterans from Afghanistan, Iraq, the Gulf War. So, but they already have a diagnosis. So I don't really diagnose. If they don't have a diagnosis, I connect them. So once I do the assessment, and by the way, I want to point out that the assessment, Janica said that, I do a good job. But then what I do is I connect with the veteran. I help them understand that, yes, I am doing an assessment and they are mandated by court. And my recommendations are going to be fully followed by court. But I still want them to be part of the treatment plan. I want them to understand why I recommended something. So the majority of the times they engage with me. It's that many times they don't trust the system, etc. So those are the assessments that I do. Once the assessment is done, I connect them with whatever service that they need, mental health, substance abuse. Some of the times they need housing, employment. So Janica basically takes care of that prior to me, but many times I still remind them to doing that. So I also, part of my role is those veterans who are not really, trust is a big issue. I invite them because they don't want to go to mental health to meet with me, and I can do individual therapy. So I invite them to meet with me a couple of times, 2-3 times. And then after they feel comfortable, then I can connect them with long-term services. Some of the services that they need is inpatient substance abuse or the dual diagnosis. Takes a little longer, but we connect them. Also, part of the Veterans Treatment Court, the therapy, we, for the past probably 4 years, have used a moral recognition therapy, MRT, that is evidence-based program. And I am one of the co-facilitators in the group. So basically the court is the one who, once they are do the assessment, I recommend in some specific cases, generally after they are after phase 1, they usually refer them to MRT. And it's a wonderful program. So that's another way that I help the veterans. I do similar to the federal court. And I mentioned the federal court because we are expanding. We are in the process of adding the federal probation and eventually federal parole. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, the court was suspended. We have been doing it in video for the past 3 months. So that's in a nutshell what I do.
Great. Thank you for providing that a great overview. You had mentioned a little bit about you're seeing Vietnam veterans and you're seeing some of the younger veterans. Are you seeing any variations in the needs between the different groups, or are they similar across the board?
In general, they are similar, but the younger veterans, they are presenting more with symptoms of PTSD, TBI, traumatic brain injury, because many of them, because of explosions, trauma while, serving. So they have a lot of the differences that, the Vietnam veterans also presents with PTSD. However, that diagnosis wasn't really used immediately after Vietnam. Took a few years or time for them to really realize that these veterans were suffering from PTSD. So now they present more urgent need, and unfortunately, the suicide incidence is very high. So we always assess for that and refer them. So it's a little bit different, but also because I think pretty much the VA learned from the Vietnam veterans. They are really more immediately, urgently involved with veterans when they are discharged, transitioning home. Still very difficult for them. So that's the difference between the two groups in a sense.
Okay, great. And I was kind of curious, are there any, because I know screening is really important in identifying the actual needs before we're connecting. Are there any suggested screening tools that can be used to help community providers identify some common challenges that veterans experience? Do you have any recommendations on screening tools?
Yes, generally what I do, because I'm very, total into reviewing records. I love to review records, even though people think might be crazy because there are zillions of notes. But I think it's extremely important. I focus mainly because they have been many times tested, neurological testing, MRI. So I like to focus on what the results are of those testing. But if they don't have any, what I use is the SLUMS. I don't exactly know what SLUMS represent, but it means that acronym. But it's basically a tool that measures memory. And in that memory, we can determine if they have dementia or mild neurocognitive disorder. If they have that, the total point is 30. And if they have less than 25, I think that's when pretty much they have mild neurocognitive disorder. So that is a very important tool because many of these veterans by age or by trauma, the memory fail. So once I have that diagnosis, temporary diagnosis, I connect them to neuropsych, the neuropsychological department. They do a more thorough assessment, a full battery of psychological assessment, memory, everything. So then we can have a diagnosis more specifically. Many times neurological assessments include referring them to a neuropsych where they do, the MRIs and other testing. So when I do my assessment, I am very curious, and I always ask, I always ask the questions about if they have been hit in the head, if they have lost consciousness, if they have a history of trauma while service or prior to, because that's important, or after. Something I have noticed is that many of the veterans who have a substance abuse, they get into fights because, they have so much anger. And that is also, I consider them because many times they have lost consciousness or they have been hit, even though they don't lose it. But that's important. So once I determine that, and that's my questioning about very into their history, development, family, because then I have a better picture about what this veteran need, and then I can connect them with all the different services that they need. That neuropsych is one of the biggest ones, because that will give us, perspective and sometimes future. Many of the veterans, especially the older ones, their memory begin to decline by age. Sometimes it's more than that. So then through the neuropsych assessment, we can determine if they need a specific living. They cannot live on their own, even though, they still want to do it their own. But many times they need nursing, assisted living. Of course, I have never had one veteran, despite of the age, who says, yes, I want to go to a nursing home, because they know what it means. but we have an idea as to what we can provide. The majority of the veterans in our homeless program are from Hot Bash. They receive a voucher, but like Janika said, we connect them with Hot Bash or vouchers, not necessarily through the VA. But the case managers will have a better idea as to how to help them manage lives and the services that they need.
Great. Thank you, Sergio. Janika, when it comes to the case management, are there certain strategies or tips that you would share with community providers who are providing case management to justice-involved veterans who are transitioning back to community?
Absolutely. The first thing I think, as Sergio indicated, is you need to be thorough with that veteran. You need to find first, not just their criminal legal matters, but their actual needs. So once the assessment, you get to build that rapport with the veterans, you'll get their backstory, you'll see what they're currently in need of. And a lot of times we find out the core critical needs of these veterans are housing, income, improved social skills, and employment. And so basically, from that point, the strategy is always connect. We're a community-facing program, so we're always networking. We're always building those relationships and strengthening only in the community, but I think it was mentioned previously, the VHA network is humongous, and a veteran can get lost in what is out there. And so our role as a case manager is to point them in the right direction always. So we're always assessing for needs, always linking them, always ensuring those warm handoffs. So if I were speaking to another case manager, it's always what's in the best interest of that veteran, and then go from there. So that is the only strategy I know.
Great. Thank you both for sharing that information.
If I can add a little bit, is that okay?
Yes.
Well, I think that Janika mentioned an excellent point. I think that because of my training, I'm used to reading notes. And I think it's important because I have been in cases like with Janika per se, when they contact me because they see my name on the chart. And I know because I have done the assessment of the veteran, so I immediately contact Janika and say, Janika, this is the situation. So I think that as a team, it is extremely important to communicate. We meet every 2 weeks. And, like I said before, keep in touch because we have to, like adding to what Janika said, the strategy is not only respecting veterans, but also kind of like meeting them where they are. Many of them have a lot of, trauma, and they have never talked to anyone. I have cases in which for the first time, because we have to ask questions about suicide, military sexual trauma, and because of my background experience in sexual abuse, I always ask them during military, sexual trauma or harassment, and I always ask prior to and after, because this is amazing. In my experience, sexual abuse is more common than we want to acknowledge or we want to accept. So it's extremely important because for the first time, and I have a few cases that for the first time they have talked to someone about being sexually harassed, sexually abused while in the military. And I mean, nobody will think that happened to a soldier, but unfortunately it's more common than we want to believe. So making them feel comfortable is extremely important, and they open up. And that information is important, like Janika, to really not to address that with the veteran, but to keep that in mind because they are very sensitive to comments, situations that present in court. So it's important to know the veteran. And I don't like to use the rubber stamp approach. I like to individualize cases. And I think that that's what the success with the VJOs that we have at Jesse Brown.
Great. Now, kind of with that, and you talked about really, understanding the need of the veteran. I'm curious, how do, and you both work directly a lot with veterans, and like you mentioned, they have to share some really tough stuff sometimes. How do you What strategies do you recommend to help build rapport for veterans to feel more comfortable about, disclosing their needs or their experiences?
My experience, I think that one of the main things is to be genuine. I will feel, I'm an older person, so in my experience, I think that people feel when you are not being genuine. Give them the time. I always think that if you give them the time, many people, not just veterans, but in general, say, thank you for giving me the time, for listening to me. Because many times we hear them, but we don't listen to what they are saying. So that first connection is extremely important. Try to make them feel comfortable. It's something that, it helps me, and I have received many comments, is just the way my office looks, the lighting, the decorations. Just that, I love to bring things from my country. So, that brings them out of like, oh my God, what is that? Where did you get? I have masks, I collect masks. So they said, where are those masks from? What do they mean to? So those little things make a connection regionally. They know that they have to do an assessment, that they are in court, that they have this crime in their back. So, but I don't focus on that. Like Janika said, it's making them feel comfortable that we are here to help. Just that first step for me is extremely important.
And just to kind of mirror what Sergio said, a lot of the times my first interaction and contact with veterans are either in the actual jail or in the treatment court. So it's already rigid. It's already very hostile. The veteran doesn't know what to expect. The veteran doesn't know me. So a lot of the times in the brief time that I have with them right before their case is called or right before we interact, is the first thank them for their service. I think that goes so far when just to and couple that with being genuine, you really strengthen it further. And I also tell my story. So I tell every single veteran that I come from a military loved one is an avid veteran who receives all of his services from Jesse Brown. And I tell them, I'm going to treat you just like I treat my family member. I'm going to ensure that, you receive the services that I can garner to you. And that really goes a long way. Just a little peace and humbleness goes a long way.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. So when I put you this,
Corinne, when you have a second, we do have a question from the audience that asks if you can speak to how you manage court-mandated treatment.
Okay, absolutely. Do we have time to answer that question?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I think Sergio mentioned it earlier. We work amongst the interdisciplinary team. And so communication is key. A lot of the times, which we'll get into about veteran treatment court in a little bit, but if the veteran elects to go into veterans treatment court, they are pretty much bound to the requirements of the recommendation that's in the assessment. Most times that point of contact is with Sergio. So what he indicates in his treatment recommendation then becomes mandated by the court. We like to use the phrase about recommended, but it is mandatory as long as the veteran is in that program. And so basically what it does at that point, we act as not necessarily the enforcer. We're still the liaison and we're still working in the best interest of the veteran, but we kind of just monitor their progress in treatment on the VA side. And we report back to the court systems their progress. If there is no progress, we work closely with NADCP's guideline about behavioral modification. So a lot of the times we take our guidance from there. If the veteran is having some hard times with their required treatment, a lot of the times work to instance. Unfortunately, if the treatment rate and they are not adhering to the guidelines of their treatment recommendations, the court, never the VA system, will impose a sanction onto that veteran. And sometimes that does end up in short-term incarceration, but we advocate to keep them involved in treatment as long as possible. I hope that answers the question.
If I can a little bit, because when I get the case, many times they have not been in front of the judge and pled, they haven't really accepted being part of the court. Once they do, they sign a contract, and that contract stipulates that they have to follow all the recommendations. That's why when they come, I remind them if they have signed that, they have signed that paper, and that's what I want to discuss that with them. And I will appreciate if they could be open with me with the history. I have already read the history, and I know that they have substance abuse, even let's say, cocaine dependence in remission. I still ask the questions, and I ask them if they are using, because most of the time under pressure, people with an addiction, they relapse. So, they feel that, I said, the treatment plan is going to be based on what you need. I'm not going to prevent substance abuse if you have been in abstinence for a year. So it doesn't make sense. So I need to recommend what really you need at this moment, here and now. And, I think that with that explanation, they open up. They know that when they go in front of the judge, they are going to follow, because they have been part of the process to get the recommendations.
We have a few more follow-ups, if I can ask that. We have two questions, one from Michael, and this is directed to Janika. Are you able to help justice-involved veterans if they're denied public or VA benefits such as appeals, or do you have to refer to a community partner or legal assistance program or organization? And then the second part of that question is, are there other common issues that you have to refer to community partners or legal assistance organizations?
Okay, if I understand that correctly, is that regarding sort of like service connection, pension, Social Security? If I can get a quick clarification.
It says if they're denied public or VA benefits, so to yes, all the above. I would agree.
Okay.
But Michael, if we're wrong, do let us know in the chat.
Okay, so absolutely, and that's a great question. So even though we're under this umbrella of a Veterans Justice Outreach program, we don't provide legal services. So we always refer out. Kevin Howell is an excellent liaison with us. He works out of our regional office. So if veterans are oftentimes denied their service connection or their VA pension, he often works with them to appeal it and to reapply. Then we also source out to the Chicago Legal Aid Clinic, and we also work with the Cabrini Green Legal Aid Clinic. And then we also partner with John Marshall Law School, University of Illinois in DePaul. And so we literally at that point, we're resourcing out, hearing their needs, what they need, and then we just refer them, do soft handoffs to ensure that their services are met at that point.
Great, thank you. And another question is, I believe this is directed to all of you. How do you manage the demands of the court and the complexities of the VA?
For me, the court demands a lot. Okay. We have great partners. I work out of 26 in California, which is one of the largest courts in the country. Our Veterans Treatment Court is one of the biggest veteran treatment courts in this current nation. And so they request a lot. They require a lot. They want to know about the veterans who are in their court. The other end, the VA also demands that we always actively in the best interest of the veteran. So we're literally like a balancing pendulum. We're stretching, we're adapting, we're flexible. And I think that encompasses what a social worker is, because we're always adapting to meet the needs of both. But it can be challenging, but we shift a lot of the times.
I will add what Janika said is also, I have created, coming from, being here 5 years, and where I came from was another hospital. I think that connections, getting to know, because the hospital is a huge system, huge. So it took me, literally, they told me, it's going to take a year or more for you to get to know us. And they were really even shorter. It has taken years for me to find out, oh, you have this program? And also create a personal, individual relationships with like neuropsych. I can really call them, and if they have an opening, they immediately take the veteran. So I think that that's key too. That we are stretched, but if you have people that you can really count on, and like say I need this, and share the group, is extremely important. We have a very group social workers of BJO, and we help each other. We talk to each other. So like again, communication is very key to help you navigate, because it's a humongous system and complicated.
Okay, great. As we talk about the Veterans Treatment Court, I wanted to kind of just pose a few questions about it. So, Janika, I'm curious, the Veterans Treatment Court, from my understanding, it's this model that was based off the drug and mental health courts. But how does it differ from the other specialty treatment courts?
Absolutely. And that's a great question, Corinne. So literally exactly what you said. It's based off that drug treatment court model. We follow guidelines from the NADCP. We work on the behavioral modification model. The thing is that is the number one differential factor is that it's only veterans on this docket. What we have found over the years is if veterans are grouped together, they feel that sense of community. Sergio indicated earlier that a lot of times these veterans come home. When they were in service, they had this structure, they had this community, everyone around them knew what to expect. And then you reintegrate them into the community, and previously, times have changed now, but previously they would come home and have nothing but themselves, reintroduced into the civilian lifestyle, and no one would understand them. And so the main difference with the Veterans Treatment Court is it's a sense of community. Everyone has fallen on hard times, but they all know they have the same goal. The veterans in my particular courtroom are very encouraging of one another. They lift each other up. They literally reach out to one another. They exchange phone numbers. They see each other in the hallway. They encourage, and they call each other out, which I don't think in other court systems, especially drug and problem-solving court, that they have that camaraderie there. Everyone is an individual. Here, they're a team. And so that's basically the end-all goal, is just to group them with like-minded individuals, and ensure that they have the services with the ultimate outcome of, reducing recidivism, reducing criminal and maladaptive behavior, and increasing their treatment.
I adding to that, many of the judges, and in our Janika's judge in court and another judge in one of the courts, they are former veterans. So that really helped them understand. And one of the judges from Skokie said that he was a regular judge, but when he came to Veterans Court, he was in general like, you do the crime, you pay the time. However, he said, I understood, because as a former Marine, I understood that culture and changed my perspective. So I think that also adds. So people know that veterans have really provided a huge service. I never tell them, I thank for your service. I always say thanks for your sacrifice, because they really sacrifice. So I think that having all these components and people who are in the court, all the components, Janika, the state attorneys, everybody else, is dedicated. It's really dedicated and committed to really help these veterans. So that's part of the success too, compared to the other courts.
Okay. And I wanted to clarify just for a second. So you talked about a team, a veteran treatment team. Who is on a veterans treatment team?
Absolutely. So in my particular courtroom, and it kind of models across the board, you have obviously your judge. We have a public defender, a state's attorney, a presiding sheriff, a clerk, a veterans justice outreach specialist. Most times it's some form of community engagement liaison. And then you have the director of the court. We oftentimes work together and bring in outside guests when time presents. So a lot of the times we'll bring in those legal aid clinics, or we'll bring in, we work closely with WVON, we'll bring a liaison in for them to kind of just share some resources and invite the veterans to share their stories. And so we meet, we gather around, and we just share our updates, and we just make sure all parts. And a lot of times veterans hear assistant state's attorney and they automatically think, oh my goodness, I'm going to jail. But as Sergio indicated, every single person on that team, even the assistant state's attorney, has the goal to make sure that this veteran is brought through this program successfully. We don't garner to be punitive.
Great. And I'm just kind of curious about the process too. I hear sometimes that, there's punishments for veterans who don't, do the things that they're supposed to do. But I also heard that sometimes veterans get awarded for doing the things that they're supposed to do. Do you have any examples of kind of how veterans are either rewarded or punished for doing what they should or shouldn't be while they're participating in the Veterans Treatment Court program?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest reward of doing what you should be doing in the Veterans Treatment Court is rapid progression through the program. So earlier I indicated that we do follow the NADCP guidelines, and their problem-solving courts, their specialty courts, and the veterans treatment courts, they follow phases. So in their underlying phases, there's specific time ranges that a veteran or an individual should stay in these particular phases. In veterans treatment court, we have 4 phases. So the average 4 phases from beginning to completion is 2 years. If a veteran is doing everything that they're supposed to be doing, and I'm so sorry, I failed to mention that we have a probation officer on our team. My apologies. That is a big piece. So if they're doing everything that they need to do, they can reduce their time up to 6 months and, successfully complete the program within a year and a half. That is some of the key components with doing everything that they're supposed to do. But on the other end, if we have a veteran who is struggling, like I indicated earlier, sometimes our judge is very, very, very fair, but he's also very firm because he is a retired Marine veteran himself. So he knows that inner working. So if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, the first thing that we do is intensify treatment in services. We'll recommend a higher level of care, revamp their treatment plan. If they don't adhere to that, or they continue to struggle with that, a lot of times they receive what's called a VOP, or a violation of probation, and they receive a sanction. Sometimes that sanction is, once again, to increase treatment. And that's always the VA's recommendation, is always to increase treatment, look at different avenues with those sanctions. And by that, they may end up in Veterans Treatment Court longer than 2 years, or they may be negatively discharged, ultimate incarceration.
Okay. And I was also curious about, at the end of a veteran successfully completes the Veterans Treatment Court process, are their charges dropped? How does that work?
So another great question. At the end of their successful program, they're given this nice, shiny manila packet with all of their court information. We paper and we say, go about your way, but that's not where it stops. So we do a lot of referrals into the community. They work with JR, with Cabrini Green Legal Aid, and they assist the veterans with getting their, you have to plead to upon success, after all the paperwork and after all of the community partners, that charge is no longer on their record. And so it's like they get a fresh start.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So I had another question about eligibility. So what is the eligibility criteria for veterans who have justice involvement to be able to participate in Veterans Treatment Court?
Sergio, would you like to speak to the eligibility for your federal court?
Yeah, my federal court, the federal is a misdemeanor. Most of the charges are disorderly conduct, possession of drugs in small quantities, attempt or threatening to hurt someone. So that court goes to the petty court, the second Monday of every month. And then the state attorneys with the veteran decide if they are qualified for the Veterans Court. Once they are in court, they have to submit only for 6 months, contrary to they are not on probation. They have only 6 appearances, and after that, the same thing, they cancel. So I'm so sorry, I just lost it right now. So you said the referral process or how it works? Janika, I'm sorry.
Yes, the eligibility, because I hear
okay,
that not all veterans, is it a certain
yes.
Crime that prevents them from being able to participate? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, generally, like I said, it's misdemeanor. The state attorney decides. The hardest charge that I had a veteran was a DUI. Came to the hospital, crashed a car, and then he was under the influence. So that's for Janika is a little bit different because she's going to explain that to you. But generally, the Veterans Treatment Court doesn't accept cases of domestic abuse or sexual abuse.
Okay.
Janika, do you want to extend on that because there are more details?
And it's absolutely. So for us, with our current Veterans Treatment Court, working with Cook County, we do, take gun charges, take a lot of the time we see veterans who have small petty theft, drug, which substance, small petty county. If you if you're in the Chicago area, we're really honing in on gun charges. They really are firm with. They really do not accept gun charges because that's just what they do. But for the most part, at that point, those are some of the cases. Those are most of the cases that we are seeing. Those PCSs, those small burglaries, those DUIs, which has just kind of skyrocketed over the last year with receiving DUI cases. And we have a really good DUI treatment program at Jesse Brown that kind of garners with that. And so that's really the requirements for that.
Great. Thank you so much for answering that. So, I mean, it definitely sounds like the Veterans Treatment Court program offers a lot of comprehensive resources and services to really help address the needs of justice-involved veterans. Now, for veterans who want to enroll, is this a program that's offered regionally? Does each county have their own Veterans Treatment Court? How does that work?
So each county does not have a Veterans Treatment Court. However, each VA facility has a VJP liaison to some capacity. In Illinois, out of the 102 counties, we service 42 counties. Cook County, we have 6 areas that we cover. I'm over, Jesse Brown, I should say, is covering 26 in California, Markham, bordering over into Indiana. We do Lake County, Porter County, LaPorte. It just varies, but we are at We are in most counties. We try to branch, and if we are not in that county, there's always avenues to advocate to have a veterans treatment court brought to that county.
Okay. And also kind of a follow-up question. How does a veteran who's justice involved, who maybe meets the criteria, how are they connected to the justice treatment court if they have one in their county?
If they have one in their county, it is always best to I think I mentioned it earlier, it's always best to indicate that the veteran is a veteran. A lot of the times, and again, it's all about what you know. Again, a lot of times veterans don't even know this program exists. So a lot of the veterans find it on accident by, discussing it with their public defender. Hey, I'm a veteran. And the public defender will say, okay, well, we have this program. Are you interested? But if a veteran is in the know of Veterans Treatment Court, number one, inform their personnel, their public defender, the state's attorney, the judge, that they are a veteran. And the rest happens from there. If they're working with a community partner, the community partner can reach out to us and we can connect them directly to the court system. It's pretty much just about getting that word out there that we exist, and knowing those pinpoints of those different court systems that actually have a veterans treatment court implemented into their programs.
Great, thank you so much. So we're coming towards the end of our panel discussion here. Sergio and Janika, thank you so much for all of that valuable information, for the work that you do to help justice-involved veterans. I know it sounds like just from all of the work that you were telling me about the various programs, you both are two very busy people. And so we really appreciate you both taking the time today to share and answer all of our questions. Just kind of monitoring our chat that we have here. I don't see any additional questions. So I think you both handled and addressed all the questions that we posed very well. So with kind of just in closing, I just want to kind of to remind everybody, it definitely takes a team. For some veterans, especially justice-involved veterans, returning home can be a long road, and it is all up to us to work collaboratively, to be aware of resources, and to work with the VA to help veterans get connected to all of the resources and benefits they're eligible for. I just kind of wanted to remind everybody kind of from the very beginning, veterans and benefits. Benefits, it's not a, it's not a luxury, it's a requirement. Veterans are one population of individuals that have the right to healthcare. So we want to make sure that veterans have and gain access to all of the benefits they are entitled to, but it is their right. And it takes a team in order to be able to do that. So thank you everybody for joining us today for our webinar series, and for continuing for all 4 of our series.